Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Jazzy Fridays right here on KWTS 91.1 FM. I hope everyone's having a great day. It's time for my favorite segment of the show, Jazz Talk, where I interview local jazz musicians. This week you have Zeke. Zeke, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man.
Tell them the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been here at WT for a while, and love jazz, obviously. Been doing it for a long time. I love getting out there and performing, as much as I can.
Yeah.
Saxophone's been a big part of my life ever since middle school. So yeah, I mean, that's about it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm 5'9".
When did you start playing jazz?
So I started, a little bit earlier than most people, and I'm kind of thankful for that. I think that was kind of an advantage for me in some ways. I started around 7th grade. We kind of had started a small jazz band in my middle school band program, and they had started doing some jazz stuff, and that was kind of my first kind of dip into it. I remember we played like a saxophone quartet that was it was called Saxifrass, and it was like it was pretty hokey, but it had some jazz elements in it, and that was kind of my first inclination. That's like, wow, there's this whole other world of saxophone to be explored, and I think that's a good thing for a lot of saxophonists, especially not just saxophonists, but a lot of other instruments have backgrounds in jazz that some people just never look at or explore because they're either like afraid of jazz or just don't care, and it's like I think if I hadn't had those experiences, I mean, starting in middle school, then I may never have even tried, but yeah, that's about when I started, and I kind of started thinking about, or started researching about it a little bit, and started finding people, and it's kind of embarrassing, but I think one of my first influences at that time was Kenny G. And I think a lot of people would be like, "What, Zeke, you hate Kenny G?" And I'm like, okay. Yes, I've been through some phases with him. It was like, at the beginning, it was like, oh yeah, this is really cool, and then for a while, you kind of get taught by people, who are like, yeah, Kenny G's a hack, he's terrible, and elevator music, and for a long time I was kind of like, oh, I hate that, and then later on you kind of garner a kind of a respect for him, because he's making a lot of money doing what he's doing. So but yeah, that was kind of the beginning of my journey there.
I see. What made you so attracted to the genre of jazz?
I think what kind of got me attracted to it is that it was different than everything else around, and kind of the free nature of it, because up until that point, you've been in you've been in band, and it's just you're sitting in a chair, you read off some music, and that's awesome. I mean, that's really fulfilling for sure. And when you do enough of those concerts and stuff, it makes you feel good for sure. But there's just a different kind of thing going on in jazz, and it's like a camaraderie with the other musicians in the ensemble, and you get to know each other pretty well because you communicate, when you're playing in an ensemble like a jazz quartet or something. And when I first kind of got exposed to that, I remember one of the first times I ever had that kind of experience. It was like jumping into the deep end for me, because my brother, he liked to kind of push me in ways that were kind of like, drop me in the deep end. And so one night, I used to live in Lubbock, and before COVID, there was a jazz bar on Broadway, kind of by the Cactus Theater, called the Piano Bar.
Yeah.
and you go in there and it's smoky and it's gritty. It's like it's the perfect like jazz vibe, just like really like almost off-putting in a way. Just like it's like smoke everywhere. You're like, oh my gosh. But that they had a stage and they got up there and I was just this little like freshman in high school and I was like, whoa, this is really cool, and they get up there and then my brother he shows me, he's like look what I brought, and it's my saxophone, and I was like, what, like where did you get that? And I was like put it away, and he's like no, you're going up there. I told him you're going up there, and I was like, oh no. So yeah, I go up there and it was super embarrassing because I was like I don't have any music, I don't know what to do. And they're like, does anybody have a chart? And so they were looking around and they were scrounging around for a little bit, and finally they found a little something for me to look at and try to play. But if I'm being honest, I didn't play at all because they started and I had no idea how to read that music. It was like, because it was different than anything I'd ever looked at before. Because I'd been in jazz band already, in high school. But those what are they called? It's like that production company that makes all the marching band stuff. Hal Leonard.
Okay, yeah.
They make a lot of jazz charts, but they're really like curated for the middle school, high school band student. Like the font is different, and like it's very palatable for those kids in the jazz bands, which is a good thing. I think that's a good thing. It's just when you finally get like a real book chart in front of you for the first time, that's like, I don't even like, what is this? This doesn't even look right. It's a totally different experience. I mean, but yeah, I did that, and my face went white, and I stood there with my saxophone in playing position, and I just was like, so and that was terrifying. But thankfully the piano player was a really cool guy, and he was telling me, he's like, you keep doing this, like, don't let this scare you, like you'll be fine. And so I was like, okay. And so years of high school went on, and I kept doing jazz band, and I was pretty involved, and I got to where I was alto one, and I was really trying to focus on getting that jazz sound, which is a huge kind of thing for saxophonists, because you kind of have to forget everything that you've learned previously, because it's a whole different world. Your embouchure is different, the way you use your air is different, and it's something you kind of have to sit in front of the mirror and learn. And the biggest help is listening. That's what I like. Anytime I have a student, which I haven't had that many, but anytime I do, I tell them the biggest two things for me when it comes to learning jazz is listening and doing. That's the biggest thing. And so that was me basically. So I bought a Charlie Parker Omnibook. That was it. And so it had a bunch of his transcribed solos for alto. And so what I would do is I had a couple jazz lessons with somebody at Tech, and they had told me, to just look at one of those every day and to listen. So that's what I did. And that really helped me kind of understand the style and the sound. But it took a long time. I mean, I have videos of me from high school where I tried to play something like Confirmation, which is the first one in that book. And I sounded awful. I mean, just garbage. So yeah, it's just a learning experience, because you have these two. But like I said, I was saying before that those two worlds of saxophone sound, at first they're separate, and you have to forget one to learn the other. But once you have both of them under your fingers, and in your embouchure and stuff, one can teach you so much about the other. It's really cool. But yeah.
I see. What are some role models you have in the world of jazz?
Oh wow. Okay. Um, I have some good ones. I mean, one of my first role models in jazz was one of my high school band directors. He was a saxophone player, and he really got me started. I mean, the one of the first times we ever talked about it, me and him, is, he was telling me that, he might not be the best like jazz musician in the world, but he's definitely been around, and he sounded really good, and he took me up to the practice rooms once and just kind of started hammering some stuff out on the piano, and he's like, you gotta work on chord tones and things like that. You gotta make sure that these are the things that you're hitting. And he taught me a lot of really like basic ground level like rock, like good foundation, and so he was one of my first big influences and role models. And I think going forward from that, obviously I started taking lessons with Dr. Barger here at WT. It actually wasn't at WT, it was at Tech when he was getting his doctorate.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and he, we worked on some jazz while we were doing that, and that was great. And obviously, great teacher. I took jazz lessons with him here during my time here, and that was amazing. Really good experience, and seeing him perform and do things around town was awesome. I think. And this one's a nice one. I think when I got here, there was another student by the name of Darian Del Cueto, and a lot of people might know that name, but yeah, ever since I got there, for me and him, it was like a really friendly kind of rivalry for a while. Although he was absolutely on top every time. I mean, he was amazing. He still is. I mean, now he's working in Dallas on some really big stuff. Recording studio stuff. He's really an excellent musician. I think having him here, and it really pushed me, because it was like, wow, there's some really excellent musicians here, and even in jazz. It's like that was really awesome to have, just somebody who can keep you on your toes. But yeah, those are like my biggest influences when it comes to just role models.
I see.
For sure.
I see. What are some of your favorite jazz artists, and why are they your favorites? Okay,
here's where I pull my phone out, because I have a list going, because I was thinking about it, and I was like, who do I like? Sometimes you have to ask yourself that question. So this one I remember. This one is probably one of my biggest artists, Michael Brecker, and just a lot of those things. I remember the first time I heard the live recording of Skunk Funk. Great name, by the way.
Yeah.
The first time I ever heard that, it was a live recording from Barcelona, and it blew my mind. I mean, his solos are insane. I mean, Michael Brecker actually he studied guitar players. Funny enough, he was a saxophonist, I should say, but he would study guitarists as well as saxophonists, and he unlocked some really cool things on the saxophone that nobody else at that time was doing, and it was wild. I mean, just like these really cool like alternate fingering, timbral, trill type stuff. It was like whoa. And that solo, you just look up some Skunk Funk live in Barcelona, and that recording, it's black and white on YouTube. I don't know, for those of you out there, definitely look it up, because it is really cool, and his solo is fantastic. And so yeah, Michael Brecker, his sound was one of the first tenor sounds that I was ever exposed to, because I played alto for the longest time. And finally, I begged my band director to let me rent out one of the tenors that we had in stock, which turned out to be a Mark VI, which you saxophonists out there, that's kind of a big deal. It was beat up for sure because it was a marching horn. You know, it wasn't the best horn in the world, but it produced a pretty good sound. And I learned kind of how to do a jazz sound on tenor sax on that horn, and listening to Michael Brecker over and over again, and just really trying to achieve. You know, I bought my first metal mouthpiece because of him, and that. So yeah, that one he was huge inspiration. And going kind of further into the funk world, you know, I love funk. That's probably, if we're talking about like the genres that are kind of underneath the jazz umbrella, funk is a huge one for me, because I just love like the screaming saxophone solos and like just the powerful bass and everything about funk I love. You know, Tower Power, a huge band, and speaking of Tower Power, my next big like influence, Lenny Pickett. He is also the saxophone player on Saturday Night Live. So if you've ever heard like the Saturday Night Live intro with the saxophone in it, that's him. And yeah, I remember hearing that, being like, who is that? I gotta figure out who that is. And then I figured out it was Lenny Pickett, and then I did some more research and found Tower of Power, and another great band for those who are listening. If you got to look up Tower of Power for sure. But yeah, no, Lenny Pickett has this way of doing altissimo, which is kind of like our higher range on saxophone. It's for the longest time it was like considered an extended technique, but as we're growing more as saxophonists, as the saxophone is growing as an instrument, because it's a very young, instrument still with a lot of kinks to be worked out. But his altissimo range is insane. I mean, he reaches octaves that, when you're trying it yourself, you're like, that's not possible. I mean, that just can't be possible. But he makes it work. I don't know how he does it. And I've tried to watch so many of his master classes and stuff, but he always kind of dances around it. He never quite like zeroes in on it. But Lenny Pickett for sure. Definitely a big one. I remember Sonny Stitt. I've listened to a lot of his stuff for sure. I love Sonny Stitt. He kind of has a more classic, kind of dark tone and timbre to his sound that I love. Yeah. On alto and tenor. I mean, he was phenomenal on both. Just really perfect. It kind of in that more earlier era of jazz, I think Sonny Stitt is kind of one of my big greats for sure.
I see.
Paul Desmond, another one from the earlier eras. I mean, he just had this really nice. It was a contrasting sound from people like Charlie Parker or like Phil Woods, because they were very like boisterous and like loud and in your face, and that's stuff I love for sure. Yeah. Not I'm trying really not dogging on those things for sure. I think, but Paul Desmond just had a different way of doing things. He's the saxophonist from Take Five, from the Dave Brubeck Quartet. Just it was very soft, and everything he does seems so like meticulous and calculated, and with purpose. It's like very, just what I said just now. Just very very meticulous and with purpose, and I like that. And whenever I think about my alto sound, I think when I hear it, I think I like, oh, okay. Like you can tell that Paul Desmond for sure was one of my big inspirations. It's just something very delicate about how he plays for sure. I see. But another one who's really influenced my alto playing is Johnny Hodges, and he played in Duke Ellington's band. And Isfahan is probably one of my favorites from them, because it's just a really long alto solo. Is basically Isfahan. It's very quiet, but they wrote it because they had visited the Isfahan in I think it's Iran. I might be wrong about that, so don't quote me there. But it's a city, and it's at that time it was very and I think it still is today. Very beautiful, very serene, and that's really reflected in that tune. So definitely listen to that one. But Johnny Hodges has this way of doing these like really big scoops, and that's kind of tough. Like as a saxophonist, that's some tough stuff to do. But he's just a master at it. It's like you're listening to a violinist. I mean, it's and his vibrato is like super wide, that kind of 40s, 50s, super wide vibrato. For stuff like that, it's super tasteful, and I really enjoy it. Yeah. I think Carlos Aina, which is the Insane in the Rain guy, I remember all throughout high school listening to that guy. I mean, wow. And not just saxophone. I mean, he's playing trumpet, piano, trombone, anything you can think of, and the guy was just nailing it. So I was like, and video game music too. That's just doing crazy arrangements, and it's just like, it was like, wow, that's insane. And he kind of made you think, like, is this the standard I need to put myself at? Like, do I need to, play all these instruments and stuff? And it's like still not quite there for sure. But he definitely could do it. I mean, other people on this podcast obviously talked about Patrick Bartley. He was a huge one for sure. Bob Reynolds is another one. I'm sure some people have talked about him on here too. I mean, he is very kind of like what I said about Paul Desmond. I've watched a lot of his videos, Bob Reynolds, and he is very meticulous about how he does things, and the way he studies jazz and just the way his mind works. It's very interesting. So I really like him. And one of my biggest ones right now is Eddie Barbash, and he I hope I said his last name right. I don't know. It trips me up sometimes, but he plays for like Corey Wong and those things, the High Flyers, I'm pretty sure, but he is phenomenal, and he studies cool, like, weird things that you wouldn't think of. Like he'll transcribe banjo solos and play them on saxophone, and they'll sound like a banjo. It's pretty insane. Irish reels, he'll do those, and they sound incredible. But yeah, I think that kind of wraps up all of my big influences, as a jazz musician.
Well, this next segment is called Jazz or Not, where I basically ask you certain artists or genres, I guess, of jazz, and you tell me if you think they should be considered jazz. Okay.
Yeah.
First up, Frank Sinatra, jazz or not?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's jazz. I think I think a lot of people look at Frank Sinatra and they're like, yeah, but it's not really real jazz. And it's like, well, I think it is.
I see.
Because there's still a lot of room for improvisation in those big band singing pieces and stuff, and I think it's a big part of the American culture at that time, and that's what jazz is. It's like, it's purely like American, in a way. It all came from the Harlem Renaissance and the people at the time, and so it was just a bigger way to do that stuff, in my opinion. I just think, but I love his, Frank Sinatra singing. I've played in some jazz bands that we've done Sinatra. I mean, back when Amarillo had the jazz club, I played in their big, huge band at the Esquire, and the guy who owned that place, Patrick Swindell, he's basically Frank Sinatra. I mean, he's the guy, and he sounds like him and sings like him, and that was a cool experience. And I didn't think I ever sat back and thought, is this jazz? I mean, it's just, to me, it's like, yeah, it is. I don't really have like a solid, like, academic answer about whether or not Frank Sinatra is jazz, but I think just the fact that it never occurred to me that it couldn't be is what solidifies it for me that it is.
I see. Are you familiar with Leve?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think she's jazz or not?
I've talked to some people about this. Personally, I think absolutely. She's done some things that are, I think some of her newer stuff might be kind of venturing outside, but the way I view jazz, to me personally, is that most everything has stemmed from jazz, other than stuff before jazz, you know. So for me, it's like this huge umbrella, and a lot of things fit underneath. I think that Leve definitely fits underneath the umbrella just because the stuff that she sings is very jazz heavy, you know, and the meter, the meter for sure, and just the chords, you know, there's some really complicated stuff in there, and I think that's and she does some improv for sure in her singing. I mean, everybody knows her solo in what's her famous song?
From the Start?
From the Start. She has a solo in that she does, and there's every time I hear it, I'm like, there's Charlie Parker in there. Yeah. I've heard it. Yeah. So I'd say definitely Leve is jazz.
Well, next up is Billy Joel, jazz or not?
Okay, that one's like kind of like, well, you know, that's certainly debatable. I think you know, I think most people would agree that he's definitely like rock and roll musician, but I think but like I said before, you know, I don't want to contradict myself here. Rock and roll for me definitely fits underneath the jazz umbrella. I think you know, rock and roll comes from 12-bar blues, that comes from the blues, and blues comes from jazz. So, you know, it's I think, you know, would you put on like a poster that like Billy Joel, the jazz musician, is here? It's like I wouldn't say that. Mm-hmm. But I think what he does definitely has the spirit of jazz, and you know, I think you know, playing piano the way he does, obviously there's some jazz background in there, and he probably knows all about jazz, you know, and probably has played a lot of jazz. So I think you know, I think for me personally, I think Billy Joel, yes, you could say is jazz, or at least jazz adjacent.
You got into this a little bit earlier, but video game jazz or not?
Video game jazz. Well, I guess it would depend on the video game, like what music we're talking about. But you know, I've played lots of video games where they incorporate some jazz for sure. I mean, I've never played it, but I hear people talk about Persona a lot, and you know, that's a big one, and I know a lot of people love that game, and I think I've listened to some of that soundtrack for sure, because I know like the 8-Bit Big Band has done it. And for sure, and I know they kind of arrange things to be more like jazz, but I think even before that, you know, the Persona soundtrack definitely has some jazz in it for sure.
I see. The next question I have for you is, if you could take the writing ability or the playing ability of any artist ever, who and why would you pick them?
Ooh, okay. So this one I might have to think about a little bit, but I think I would have to take the playing ability of Michael Brecker. I mean, there is just so many recordings of him that are good. I mean, just really, really good. Another really good one. He has a solo in New York State of Mind. It's a specific recording, but it was with I'm pretty sure it was with the Bob Kurnow Big Band. But there's a solo in there that just is otherworldly. I mean, it's not so much complicated like a Charlie Parker, like a, you know, a lot of other Michael Brecker solos like that are just all over the place, you know, up and down. Yeah. But it's very like, it just gives me goosebumps every time. I mean, it just, you know, when he starts the solo, he starts at like really low on the range of the tenor, which is a pretty kind of a low range, and then it's just like deep and full, and then he just rockets up to this like really high range. And it just, whenever you hear that, it's just like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, you know. So you know, I think if I could take anybody's playing ability, it'd definitely be Michael Brecker, because I feel like if I had just a little bit of him, you know, it would just be like I could do anything.
I see.
Absolutely, the possibilities are endless.
I see. How do you feel about the direction that jazz is currently going in, and what do you hope for jazz in the future?
Well, I think jazz is going in a really good direction. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who are taking it in where it needs to be going. You know, I think anything that keeps jazz away from being gatekept, you know, by people, because there's people out there who definitely are like jazz is supposed to be this way, and jazz stopped being real jazz. Like a lot of people say, whenever jazz fusion became a thing, that jazz stopped being jazz. I really disagree. I think definitely letting people take jazz and run with it is what jazz was all about in the first place. And yeah, for sure. Like people like Patrick Bartley, he's doing some crazy cool stuff. He had that album that was just really experimental, and it was really cool. There's a band called Berlioz that I've been listening to, and they have a tune called "Jazz is for Ordinary People," and oh my goodness, I mean, like first time I heard it, I was like, wow, this is really cool. It was something I never really had heard before. It's very ethereal. That's kind of the word I like to use for it. It's ethereal. They use a lot of echo and ambience. And I almost had the chance to see them in Dallas, but I didn't end up going. But their stuff is really cool, but it's really different. And a lot of spoken. They kind of combine like spoken word stuff and it's just really cool. And I think it's different from a lot of things that you'd expect to hear. But a lot of delay and a lot of like pedal work with the saxophonist and stuff, and I think that's awesome. So I think like I said before, anything that if you just take jazz and run with it and let it grow, just don't run it into the ground by keeping it in a cage. You know what I mean? So it's like I think anything that keeps the spirit of jazz and uses like the tools of the past and the influences of the past, but kind of makes it grow and turns it into something else. I think that's great. As long as it's organic. Just don't make jazz boring. I think that's my biggest thing is like as long as it's not like, this isn't even close to what we enjoyed before. But yeah, no, I think I'm pretty loose when it comes to that. I don't think that jazz should stay in one place at all.
I see. Why do you think jazz and people's emotions have such a close connection?
Well, I just think jazz started out as kind of an emotional music. I mean, you go back to the very, very beginning of what jazz was going to become. I mean, and some people might argue with me with this. I don't know, but because I'm not really a jazz historian for sure. But I think for me, it starts with like slave spirituals, for sure. You can. I think, and of course those are emotional. I mean, I don't have to talk about that. But and you keep going on, and a few years later, you have the Harlem Renaissance. Like I said before, there's people they were taking that music like the blues, which kind of came from those spirituals. That was kind of the first kind of thing for jazz was blues. And blues, when you sing the blues when you're sad, that's emotion. I think you could say that at the deepest heart of jazz, there's always going to be emotion. I don't think there's ever been a time that I've been performing that I just was that I was just completely emotionless. I mean, I don't think I've ever played any kind of music like that. I think all music, not just jazz, is rooted in emotion. Maybe not like what am I thinking, like Baroque, kind of style stuff, like maybe not, but I think most music, especially after a certain point, is emotional.
I see. Yeah.
So yeah, I think people connect to jazz a lot because it's real life experiences most of the time. Jazz never came from the elite. I mean, it might be a little bit different now, but when jazz was first, becoming huge, it wasn't like the elite people up at the top in their ivory towers, looking down on people below. It was real people, with real experiences, and I think that they put those into their music. They stitched their own lives into those standards, that we read all the time in the real book. I think a lot of those things, it's definitely emotional for sure.
I see. Well, the last question I have for you is, what advice do you have for up-and-coming jazz musicians?
I think the biggest advice I can give, number one is, keep practicing. Something we could all do, but that's surface level stuff. I think my biggest advice is don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to go and ask, like, can I play, something, or because that, if you don't take that first step into performing, like right now I'm gigging with wedding bands and stuff, and that's really fun, and it pays pretty good, when you're out there, but I would never be there if, like, I didn't if they didn't ask me, like, hey Zeke, or I didn't beg to go and play at the jazz club, or it's like you gotta kind of throw yourself out there and jump into the deep end. You can't just sit and wait for somebody to say, hey, come play jazz with us. Like, you gotta get out there. I think one of the biggest disservices you can do to yourself is just to practice and practice and practice and practice, but never perform. So if there's ever a jazz jam or something going on, I don't go to nearly enough. I think those are the places you need to go, for sure. So, like, look around in your communities. If there's a place to play, go play. I think one of my favorite experiences was going to a jazz jam at the Esquire. Me and Darian, I talked about him before. We went, and it was from like 2 a.m. to like, or it was like midnight to 2 a.m. Was the time of jam, and it was really cool. It was cool being downtown in the middle of the night. There was a couple people there, but it wasn't like a whole bunch of people. But it was really chill and loaded. And I got up there and I played. It was a famous, like, I don't quite remember, but it was a standard, and I played with it was E.P. Simmons. He was on piano, and it was really cool because I just kind of got to kind of noodle around and kind of explore some new things, and that's when what you take from the practice room and you kind of jam it into real life. And it's like, and this is bringing me to my last, like, point about advice is don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, people will always say, like, oh, jazz is just an excuse to play wrong notes or make mistakes, and it's like, well, no, but it's a space where you can, and you get to learn from them, and I think that there's so many times where I've played like a bad interval, still do, it's just like that stuff happens, but you learn to take those things and make them into something better, and it's like, I think a lot of people get so fixated on being right 100% of the time, especially when they're soloing. And it's like, don't be so afraid to mess up. Because, like, half the time, people don't really know what you're doing up there, so it's like, as long as you can, it's kind of like just putting those mistakes underneath the rug. It's just kind of like you're making something new out of it. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to improv is just, being nice to yourself, obviously. So, be nice to yourself, get out there and play, and just enjoy yourself, playing jazz.
Yeah, perfect.
For sure.
I like to give this moment to all my guests, a little moment for you to promote anything, any gigs going on, shout out any local artists you want to shout out. Just the moment is yours. Take it away.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, just, Groove Anthem is a band is around Amarillo right now that it's got my good buddy Sergio playing in it. Great band. Anytime you see Zach Lim or any of my buddies here at WT, anybody who's been on this show, definitely go and support them. Anybody who's doing jazz around town, for sure. There's like a jazz Facebook page, I think, about Amarillo Jazz. Look it up. Go see what's going on. But yeah, that's about it for me. I mean,
perfect.
Yeah.
And then, of course, at the end of every show, I ask my guests to recommend one song to be added on the Jazzy Fridays playlist. Forever, what song would you like to recommend?
Okay, I'm gonna do "Don't Destroy the Funk" by Fat Funkatron.
Perfect.
Yeah, those are both spelled with PH. So.
Perfect. And then, of course, we're gonna have the Polaroid picture right after this. So check out the Instagram to see what pose Zeke decided. But other than that, thank you, Zeke, for coming on. Very
Absolutely.
great interview today.
I enjoyed it.
Second to last show, the second to last Jazzy Fridays of the semester. So make sure to stay tuned. Of course, we have Elliot Sat Reads right after this. In just a little bit, I'll catch you all later. See you in a little bit.